Hello, and welcome to my BSidesPhilly talk. I'm really happy we're all still able to get together remotely, and I hope everybody's safe. While this is my first time presenting at BSidesPhilly, I've been an attendee since at least 2018, so I'm happy to keep the streak alive of being here in one capacity or another. My name is Kyle Sheely, and I'm a senior consultant at Security Risk Advisors, or SRA. SRA is a boutique information security consulting firm headed right here in Philadelphia. Just a little bit about me. I enjoy Dungeons and Dragons, and when there isn't an international pandemic going on, I also love to travel. In 2020, since I was at home this year, I became pretty okay at rock climbing and picked up some painting skills too. Here's me painting a green dragon for a Dungeons and Dragons campaign. And if that doesn't establish my nerd cred for you, I don't know what will. In the past, I've been the lead security operations analyst for Fortune 500 and Global 1000 healthcare and pharmaceutical related organizations. My job has me act in a leadership capacity, overseeing a number of efforts in cybersecurity, ranging from vulnerability management, alert triage, security tool engineering, even incident response, all the way to providing detailed recommendations and intelligence to the C-suite. I'm going to touch on some of those insights that I've gathered over the past 12 months, both from my experiences and from talking and working with others in the industry. This presentation is as much about healthcare and pharma-related cybersecurity as it is about operating in cybersecurity as a whole. So I think there's a little bit for everybody, and I'm happy you tuned in. And while I have consulted with other individuals on this, I do want to stress that these are my opinions and observations, not necessarily those of any organization I'm associated with or SRAs. I can only speak for myself. Additionally, to keep the anonymity of the organizations that I've protected, I may change or not include certain names and locations in my presentation. Before we get into it, I do want to address the elephant in the room for any time travelers in attendance or anybody who isn't aware of what's been going on. In November of last year, a highly contagious coronavirus, dubbed COVID-19 or COVID, began to make its way across the world. And by March of this year, many countries had enacted some form or another of lockdown in efforts to contain the virus. A large majority of the world experienced and continues to experience a drastic change in how we do business. My clients are in a similar boat. We also interact with loved ones differently and generally live our lives in a completely different manner than what we did just 12 short months ago. Keeping on healthcare and pharma, a lot of eyes have been on us lately, as they're the ones either treating the sick or creating a viable vaccine. At the time of this presentation, unfortunately, about 1.5 million people have passed away from things attributed to COVID-19. And many of the United States is going into some form of secondary restriction to curtail another quote unquote wave of the virus. Several companies, admittedly, are close to creating a vaccine, but government estimates detail that worldwide, let alone countrywide dissemination, probably won't be ready until about mid-2021. I wanted to give that brief summary there just to set the stage of where we're at and where I'm at operating on a daily basis. Almost every cybersecurity attack attempts to include details about important work, life, or current events related activities to increase the legitimacy of the activity, or rather the legitimacy of the attack to entice the user. I might receive an email at work saying that I need to click here to listen to this voicemail, when in actuality, if I click that link, it's going to send me somewhere malicious, and I'll probably download something like an Emotet banking Trojan. These techniques, they often ebb and flow over time to coincide with current events. Common ones that I've seen include tax season, Christmas bonuses, even the latest political drama. In the case of COVID, however, just like mimicking the global affecting reach that it had on society, we've seen this huge blanketed approach to cyber attacks by cyber criminals since the beginning of the year. All COVID, all the time. For a period of that time, we saw, at least our analysts did, all vectors, phishing, mouse spam, you name it, a concerted effort to capitalize on COVID as a theme. Now, with that being said, pictured here is just a sampling of COVID-themed phishing attempts that I saw in a 10-day period in March. In the first quarter of 2020 alone, our team saw over 100,000 phony domains registered with COVID-19 registered terms, or rather related terms. We also saw emails claim to have important instructions for employees on how they might look to conduct business during COVID-19, as well as claim to include reports or statistics from the World Health Organization, the White House, the United Nations, whoever, with similarly named malicious attachments as legitimate ones. I saw something particularly clever when attackers embedded headlines and snippets from COVID-19 news stories directly into malware, so that when antivirus or other tools that would scan it might be tricked into thinking that that attachment that the user is clicking on is actually legitimate, or at least the email was. We noticed a host of fake programs popping up in advertising, third-party websites that were related to our clients, even stuff in the App Store. We saw some pretending to be client medical portals and related applications to some of our clients as well. Fake links and quote-unquote helpful advice was put in comment sections on informational videos of our clients on social media. It was everywhere. In my lifetime, and likely yours, we've not seen another global incident on the scale of COVID. And I wager a guess that we'll probably not see one for quite some time that has been as single-minded across cybersecurity too. Now, but while we saw this unprecedented focus on one theme, it's important to note hackers are generally lazy. And that's for the hackers in the room. I'm not trying to be mean here. Why reinvent the wheel, you know? Most, if not all, of the stuff that came our way was COVID packaged, but the malware behind it, it was all the same. Your standard emotet and TrickBot banking Trojans, oh, they were there, as well as spyware variations, password crackers, or rather password stealers, ransomware, the whole thing. Oftentimes, we'd see websites and programs bundle their malware with legitimate COVID-19 materials. If you all remember, Johns Hopkins put out that COVID-19 global tracker. We saw a similar application, but instead when you downloaded it, it also had some spyware behind it. We also saw promotional deals like get $5 off your COVID test by downloading this contact tracing program. When in actuality, if you did so, you'd be putting ransomware on your Android phone. All of this stuff was COVID themed, but it was still the same old malware in the background. And it was just used the guise of COVID to convince users that what they downloaded was legitimate. It should be mentioned here that the unifying theme in question also forced a lockdown. And that's important because healthcare is traditional in their work habits. Client-side IT and SecOps traditionally work alongside those in the hospital on site. And it's done that way because there's a belief that they need to be there to fix issues as needed. But it also comes from an old school mindset of requiring in-office work, of being visibly seen in the office. There's an adage oft said in healthcare: if the doctors have to be here, you've got to be here. Then COVID hits, and healthcare and pharma, They're not prepared. Despite the boots on the ground doctors, nurses, and technicians filling the hospitals to handle everything that the virus threw at the world, a large majority of our users in healthcare and pharma needed to pivot to remote work for safety concerns for just that very reason. They were deemed essential workers, but they were also deemed workers that could have done their work outside of the hospital. Literally overnight, infrastructure has to be changed to hold us over in the initial weeks until IT can provide more permanent solutions, because there's a lot of people now putting stress on servers that never expected that amount of people. To assist with the needs and find their weaknesses, SRA offered all of our healthcare and pharma efforts, or pharma clients rather, free comprehensive health checks to determine the gaps that they need to remediate the most. Client-side security teams begin to roll out to users more security best practices to beef up security surrounding remote connections and other things that needed to be fixed. Speaking of which, some of our employees, when they went that way to remote work, they didn't have a solid enough connection at home to do Zoom meetings, let alone VPN. How do you handle that? Many of our workers were at a level where they were comfortable handling their work at home, but some weren't comfortable with working from home. Just everything from their laptop was new. It could have just been the old-fashioned way of the hospital or what they had been ingrained in. It took some doing to get into that new habit. And I think a lot of it comes down to they didn't have their coworkers now beside them to assist for the small stuff. Now they're starting to call me and the rest of the guys and girls and non-binary pals for the small stuff too. And IT and SecOps roles begin to blend as we have to start playing zone coverage as we're stretched thin. That's when everything, it's working smoothly. Now what happens when you throw in a couple incidents? How do you handle all that? The short answer of it all, it's triaging one crisis at a time and trust in the quality of your team. I really want to commend the teams that I've been a part of here because they've done yeoman's work in the last 12 months, and they've been able to figure out questions or answers to questions that I just couldn't anticipate. Like, how do you remotely reimage a user's laptop from another state when the only thing that you've ever done prior to that is have them come into the office with it? What policy do you do for that? Or what do you do when the new MFA patch prevents your entire SecOps team from communicating with the rest of the company and themselves via instant message? We had to tackle those things, and it was something that really required the resilience of the team to get there. I don't get into the technical details about those topics here, or the user and organizational recommendations about defending against certain attacks. But as supplemental information to this talk, I encourage you to check out Security Risk Advisor's blog, where I talked just about that topic in a blog post entitled COVID-19 Staying Secure While Staying at Home. It was the seed for this presentation. Now, the bad news to all this, as we began to work to remotely, and we also had to then handle all of the new bumps and changes that went along with it, is that so too did the bad guys. And we noticed that they did it better than we did. Since the beginning of 2020, we saw a sizable uptick in activity across the board, from scanning to typo squatting to phishing email quantity, everything up. Whether it was previous attackers capitalizing on the vaccine efforts, the desperation of some hospitals to stay online, or maybe attackers are just now furloughed from their main jobs and they're just trying to start up a side hustle and script kidding, whatever it was, remote work definitely suited their efforts. Pharma teams were stretched thin already, and this increase in volume simply exacerbated that. So how do you counter that? Yes, automation to get the low-hanging fruit out of the way so that you can focus on the real stuff is an option to an extent, but you need bodies in the SOC. You really can't beat old-fashioned extra eyes on glass. We're fortunate in that the information security industry grows during crises. It seems to be, at least to me, at least so far, that information security is recession proof and a hot industry to be in, especially in these last few years. It's a sexy career to get into. That's good for us because a lot of organizations continue to grow with the needs that they had, healthcare and pharma included, and therefore we needed new recruits to fill the alert queues and become serious engineers and analysts to staff them. But in a time when you can't meet a candidate face to face, and I can't take them out to dinner so I can interact with them, how do you accurately assess their quality over Zoom? A lot of what I look for in an entry-level candidate correlates to their ability to communicate well with others. Yes, technical knowledge is good, but I found that soft skills are often more difficult than the hard skills. It's my opinion that it's much easier to learn how to dissect malware and triage alerts than it is to learn how to build and maintain solid relationships with your client, especially if we're doing it this way over the internet. I want to hire somebody who I look forward to working with. I want to hire somebody who makes my day go faster because they're joking around and enjoying themselves. And when we meet with the client, they get along with them. Even more importantly to me is that they jive well with our organization's culture. I want them to stick around for a little while. On more than a couple occasions, I'd go into meetings with clients where the topic at hand was to brief them on a certain ongoing incident. But when I got there, all they wanted to do was vent or shoot the breeze. I'd talked with the manager of security about home cooking, his favorite NHL team, and him trying to get his girlfriend into board games. I have a coworker who likes to lovingly call these hangout sessions. I'm inclined to agree. Information security is as much about stopping incidents as it is assuaging the fear of one and just being a friend. And I look for people to fill my team who could do both. And those were the ones who best succeeded. As a result, I found that the best way to see who's going to be a good fit is just to have an honest conversation with them, whether in person or on Zoom, where I don't know, but I will learn that for the next time that we talk is not only an acceptable, but an applauded answer to give, where after they've demonstrated basic competency in cybersecurity, I ask myself, would I want to be stuck in an airplane with them for a red eye? Or more aptly to this period, would I want to be in quarantine with them? I would rather hire an affable elementary school teacher with an interest in computers who's familiar with how to corral 20 fifth graders and distill a topic to understandable chunks for them, rather than hire a cybersecurity whiz with a master's degree in computer engineering, but no social skills. Speaking of college degrees, some of the best analysts that I've worked with, they don't have one. It was not a requisite to their success. And in fact, when interviewing for new hires, I found that sometimes it's better to more heavily weigh those who have demonstrated competency through independence after getting a certification or two, or just doing an 8-week intensive course, less someone who has been spoon-fed stuff. Now, I'm a 4-year college degree grad, and I'm not saying anything bad for them, but I'm just saying as far as the pandemic is concerned, it's demonstrated to us that those who have come in with that independence of learning have an ability to learn and work independently, a valuable skill and a good indicator of success at remote work. In the span of the last year, some of the teams that I led and worked on doubled in size just to manage the increase in the amount of volume we had as well as the increased urgency in issues that were once on the back burner. We hired a lot of people. And when talking with them during the hiring process, some of them expressly stated how burned out they were from their roles at other locations in both information security and elsewhere. We'd say, "Why are you looking for a new job? Your old job sounds great." And some of them would just tell us, it's burnout. I can't take this anymore. I'm working 24 hours a day here. I just need a change to something more sustainable. We asked a related question to ourselves as we hired them. How do you keep someone engaged and connected to their coworkers and the mission amid a time of such isolation? That refrain of sustainability is something that we look to build and brought to heart and kept as we began to train these new analysts. For those that started after March of 2020, most of them, if not all, have really yet to meet the team or any of us in person. It's a far cry from what things were like just a year ago, and definitely from what it was like when I started my first days at SRA. We're an organization that prides ourselves of in-person gatherings, of connecting over a beer at work. Now, many just receive their laptops and phones in the mail. And their first happy hour, that's over Teams. It was therefore paramount to us as a team and as a company culture to keep them feeling as part of the team as possible, as much as possible, because that's how we viewed them. Stuff that's often seen as discretionary, stuff that's often cut, like a swag bag or a company t-shirt or a handwritten letter written during Thanksgiving from their manager, becomes essential to some. It gave them something physical to hold on to when everything else was cold and online. We began to invest heavily into mentorship. Our mentorship program provided new hires and inexperienced consultants with people they could go to for anything. And it doesn't matter how far up the organization you go, that will be the case for them. Mentors provided them with answers surrounding culture, how to handle personal relationships, professional relationships, handle feedback, learn best practices for time management, and more. We recognize that a lot of people's escapes, their ways to de-stress and relax before or after work, they dried up. Now their lives outside their work, they're filled with anxiety or stress, oftentimes because of the virus or the economy or what's happening with their family, or a mixture of it all. And ironically, work became their escape. It was a place for them to find stability, and it became a coping mechanism for some of them. People began to invent their own new methods for coping at work. And we sought to promote an environment where, despite them protecting hospital systems or working on an incredibly important vaccination creation effort during a global pandemic and protecting it, work could still be enjoyable. Work could be that escape for them. Some of this included opportunities that were interactive, ways for them to safely get together even during COVID. We had weekly Thursday happy hours on Teams. I've already mentioned that. And we also allocated a food budget for mentors and mentees to get a hangout or to get some food where they could then hang out with their mentor and talk over lunch, even if it was just a vent or to see where they're at. We had a period of time where there were some healthy gatherings, again over Zoom, where we talk about nutrition, meditation, perform yoga together, or any number of things. Now, I know what you're probably thinking, or at least some of you, but I really want you to know that all of this is to say that we look to really shine a light on our culture, and that this type of interpersonal engagement is most certainly not fluff. I know cybersecurity is more, I would say, a hard science for some, and it's less feely. But those aspects of that interaction, that interpersonal engagement, none of the other stuff that we did in our job description would be done as well as it's done when we get the culture right, when we establish a solid foundation of that interpersonal relationship, even during a time of remote working. To some, a lot of the remote learning and remote work in general that we did also became a lesson in managing expectations. Some people adapted better than others to quarantine. It affected every person differently and sometimes in really significant ways. Some of our analysts who routinely sought out extra training or were rock stars in the queues just a year ago struggled significantly, and they didn't pursue anything more than just to get by. But you have to recognize, as I did, that just making it, just getting by in the last 12 months is an award in and of itself. How do we handle the impact on the degradation of their performance while recognizing that their performance isn't the problem? This massive adaptation from a management perspective meant that we had to view our people grew not compared to their previous years, but from where they started in quarantine. And even then, to understand that this is an unprecedented time on how we handle ourselves. We seriously modulated our expectations as far as engagement and motivation were concerned. Did you show up to do your job? Did you provide quality deliverables and worked well with others? Then you're succeeding. You're succeeding at your job, plain and simple. So that's how we handled recruiting, onboarding, virtual workforces, and new hires. But what about handling the C-suite? In case you weren't aware, there's a massive movement to fast track a COVID vaccine. Some of the clients that we had and I've worked with have been involved with those efforts. That effort resulted in a changing relationship with leadership in the boardroom. For starters, they welcomed an extra focus on security. In fact, a lot of them became way more hands-on in a big way, acknowledging that if this part of the organization, cybersecurity, doesn't go well, the rest of the org could experience big ramifications. This extra focus meant that we were asked for more and more frequent updates regarding the latest threats or changes to the risk landscape. The trouble was, most of the risk landscape didn't change much to meet that new focus. CISOs and CIOs wanted to demonstrate value, but their drive went to the threat of the day for the most part, or areas in risk management that didn't particularly help them. Perhaps they picked up a magazine and saw a vendor espousing a new issue that just positively needed to be fixed by this shiny new firewall. And we'd have to push back and say, but sir, we don't even have DLP or complete coverage with EDR tools. And detection and removal is the name of the game now. And all prevent defense does not work. A lot of these conversations occurred through intermediaries, but the gravity to them was just the same. We recognized where the focus needed to be, and we did our best to share what we could with the C-suite by demonstrating valuable tuning with what we had and filling the gaps discovered by those health checks. As for the threat of the day updates, we provided them. Sometimes you just have to keep them feeling informed. One of the things that we were also dealing with that we felt we were in lockstep with the C-suite was the remediation to which we handled critical issues. In the past, some of these organizations would sweat the small stuff and the big stuff. But stuff like ransomware has always been impactful to healthcare entities. But with COVID and how systems were stressed to the limit, operating at max capacity, there was a belief that if something were to hit us, it'd be seriously bad news bears. Because we're all remote, and it's going to be a lot more difficult to remediate an issue, especially now that we are changing policy, changing infrastructure, changing a lot of things. A lot of things were different from just a year ago. When Ryuk ransomware hit several major hospital systems, the response to that was swift and effective from every client I saw. Everybody dropped everything to fix things on a dime, from a threat intelligence, vulnerability management, even purple teaming standpoint. I've never seen anything like it or how fast it was reacted to, but everybody knew that healthcare and pharma could no longer handle the risk. Alongside all that, There's been this huge emphasis of cross-competitive partnerships as the healthcare, pharma, private sector, and governments work together to create a vaccine. Whereas in the past, orgs were reticent to share their issues with others for fear of another company leapfrogging them or capitalizing upon it. What's instead taken hold is a belief that we do more good by sharing our issues, working together to see if anyone else has a solution, and rising together. We're seeing this in places like the HISAC community, where members of organizations have grown, and those who are a part of this information sharing group are, in fact, doing more sharing, as opposed to just a sparse few sharing and the majority just taking that information. Whoops, did not mean to switch to that one. There's also an effort driven from a vertical standpoint within each company to keep all abreast of where we are from an information security perspective. Sharing information also horizontally between coworkers too, to make sure everybody's informed, staying up to date with information as best as possible. A lot of this has been spurred in the C-suite by strong healthcare leaders, particularly in pharma, saying, all right, look, we got to do this. We're all in this together. How can we work with you, and how can you work with what we can give you? No longer is it as tight-lipped and siloed. The C-suite is saying that we, as an industry, as a whole, have an obligation to our patients in order to protect this thing that could solve a global pandemic. And that obligation requires us to work outside our org to accomplish it. Suddenly, one company needs another in a way that we haven't seen in the past. Similarly, we've seen a full shift, especially budgetarily, to implementing OT, or operational technology security. This stuff, it's like SCADA and ICS. It looks to detect and control changes to devices, processes, events. When it's paramount that nothing interrupts the creation of, or possibly even worse, changes the very formula or creation of a vaccine, OT security comes in. The C-suite recognizes this. They recognize that vaccine creation is now critical infrastructure, much as how power stations or transportation networks are classified as such. They also recognize that we need solutions that allow us complete visibility of network control traffic and can establish the right security policies. The problem is, for a lot of healthcare and pharma orgs, they have no idea how to do it or how to do it well. This stuff is different from what's been standard in the past. Your run-of-the-mill on-prem security or your more recent innovations of cloud. But with an openness of new ideas and a hands-on approach by the C-suite, that emphasis to cross-competitive partnerships, and now a shift in the budget towards cybersecurity, and this in particular, many orgs are just starting on OT. And they're starting in a good place, I'd say, and have a good roadmap for the future. I think as we, fingers crossed, emerge from the pandemic over the next year, we'll notice a number of lasting effects to the industry, and how each organization handles it will internally and publicly determine their success in the coming years. I truly believe the remote workforce is here to stay, even when it comes to formerly traditional workplaces like hospitals. Up until this point, many in management viewed testing a remote workforce as just too risky or breaking an entrenched company culture. COVID, all things considered, provided us with the rare opportunity to prove that for a large majority of healthcare and pharma workers, they don't have to be in the office to be productive or effective. To that note, I've seen companies begin to disband current offices and abandon some expansion efforts, not just because of restricting budgets, but because it's more cost effective to have a remote workforce. A publication by the group Global Workplace Analytics found that a typical employer can save about $11,000 per year per person for those who work remotely just half of the time. even more if they went full remote. This included healthcare and pharma in that study. Am I saying offices are completely going away? No, absolutely not. I believe nothing can beat in-person, face-to-face training and relationship building. I'm much more of an in-person person, and if I have the choice, I'll be there. But even in security, the options and feasibility are there. There's less of an expectation now in healthcare pharma that if the doctors have to be here, you have to be here. IT healthcare workers have really demonstrated that they can work from home, and they can do it well, provided they have support. Moreover, it's already, I would say I've already begun to see this as not just a perk, but as an expectation moving forward for both IT and SecOps as they're looking to apply to positions within healthcare and pharma organizations. The industry's hot and have continued to grow, and to get top talent, orgs are going to have to demonstrate that they can support employees in flexible work styles and locations. Be prepared for more questions during interviews like, will this job allow me to work remotely? I think this is for the better, especially from a company standpoint. Why limit your talent pool to a geographic location? You can become more competitive and build your company's reach by embracing a digital work landscape. And what's more, it protects companies too. You'll always have someone online. Imagine what happens if you center all of your employees in a single geographic area, and that area then is affected by a natural disaster. Your entire IT services team could be affected and knocked out. That isn't the case if you've got people working different time zones, different regions. They'll be able to stand up ready if one part of their team goes down elsewhere, and it just expands the company's reach as a whole. So that's how we handled recruiting, onboarding. But I will also say cyber for the first time is having this front seat at the budget in healthcare for the absolute first time. And I think we should capitalize upon it. I will say that, well, let me take a drink of water. Never before has healthcare had cybersecurity at the table. That's a very new fact. And I really believe that we need to capitalize upon it. The recognition is there by the C-suite that for healthcare and pharma to move forward competitively, they need to stay secure, and that requires cybersecurity working there. I think we should capitalize upon it. And the companies that will grow the most, those healthcare and pharma organizations that put the efforts in to building a cybersecurity maturity program better than the rest, will be the ones at the top of the game during COVID and after COVID and further on afterwards.